All right, welcome everyone. Today we're diving deep into something pretty fascinating, the South African Constitution of 1996.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know. I know. Constitution's maybe not the most thrilling thing you think about in your free time, but trust me on this one. This document, it's not just some dusty old rule book. It's like a story. It's South Africa's story of like coming out of the darkness of apartheid and into the light of democracy, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a blueprint for hope.
It really is. I mean, you think about it, right? This Constitution, it's not just about laws and structures. It's about, like, dreams. It's about the dreams of a nation for a better future. And that makes it super powerful.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be unpacking in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll, like, equip you with this solid grasp of how this Constitution works. We'll be going through its structure, its values, all the key parts, you know? But we're going to do it in a way that's engaging. We're not just going to be like reciting articles and clauses at you.
Right.
We want to give you those aha moments.
Yeah.
Make you think, oh, that's why they did that.
And why it matters to people in their everyday lives, right? Like, how does this Constitution actually impact people on the ground?
Totally. So let's start at the very beginning, right? A very good place to start, as they say.
Love it.
The preamble. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The preamble of the South African Constitution, it's not just legal jargon. It's like a poem, almost full of powerful language. It talks about healing the divisions of the past, building a society based on democratic values, improving the quality of life for everyone.
Yeah, but for all citizens.
And it even ends with, get this, a multilingual blessing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's incredible.
That's the thing about this Constitution. Like, right from the get-go, it's so inclusive, you know? Like, imagine after years of this horrible, like, division and oppression, finally people come together and say, okay, let's build something better. Let's try to get, like, that's the energy you feel in the preamble.
Yeah, that's inspiring.
It is.
Like a call to action. All right, so we've got this powerful preamble setting the tone.
Yeah.
Now we move on to Chapter 1, the founding provisions. So, you know, Chapter 1, it lays down the basics, right? It declares South Africa as one sovereign democratic state.
Right. Seems straightforward.
Yeah, you'd think so, but it's actually pretty profound.
Yeah, if you think about what came before, right, apartheid.
Right.
This statement, it's a total rejection of that whole fragmented and unequal system. It's like a line in the sand. It's saying, we are one nation now, united, and we're going to be governed by the will of the people.
Boom. Mic drop moment right there.
Powerful stuff.
And then it gets even better. You've got this list of values, right? Like human dignity, equality, non-racialism, rule of law.
The non-negotiables, right. The guiding principles for this new South Africa.
Yeah, like the pillars that everything else is built on.
And it's important to remember these values, they're not just like nice-sounding words. They have real consequences.
Right. Yeah.
They shape how the country is run, how laws are made, how people are treated.
Absolutely. So we've got these guiding principles, right? And then, bam, Section 2. And Section 2 basically says, look, this Constitution, it's the boss, okay?
Yeah, it's a top dog.
Any law that contradicts the Constitution, nope, null and void.
That's what we call constitutional supremacy, right? And it's a big deal. It means everything else, every law, every action the government takes, all has to line up with what's written in this document.
It's like the ultimate rule book.
Like the referee, making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Okay, so we've got the stage set, right? The rules are laid out. Now, things are going to get really interesting.
Oh, go left.
Because we're moving on to Chapter 2, the Bill of Rights. And this is where it gets good, folks.
The heart and soul of the Constitution.
This is all about guaranteeing those basic rights and freedoms for everyone in South Africa.
Yeah, and it's especially powerful given, you know, the history.
Given the history, yeah.
Yeah, the systemic discrimination of apartheid.
Right, they're coming out of this dark period,
Yeah.
and they're saying, no more.
Never again.
We're going to lay it all out here. These are your rights, and they apply to everyone. In Section 7, oh man, it's like this giant neon sign saying these rights apply to everyone, no exceptions.
It's like the cornerstone of their democracy.
That's incredible.
Making sure that every single person, doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, you are treated with dignity and respect.
Okay, so let's get specific. We've got those classic rights, right? The ones that are like fundamental to any democracy.
The building blocks.
Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, political rights.
Right, those freedoms that, you know, we sometimes take for granted, to speak our minds, to protest peacefully, form groups, participate in politics.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in many parts of the world, those rights They're under threat, even today.
It's a stark reminder
Yeah.
that we can't take these freedoms for granted. And the South African Constitution, it's like they're shouting it from the rooftops. We will protect these rights. But it's not just about those classic rights. There are some rights in the South African Bill of Rights that are, like, totally unique, reflecting their specific history.
Yeah,
Sleep
absolutely.
equality, for instance. It's not just about race.
Yeah, it goes way beyond that.
It addresses things like gender, sexual orientation, disability.
It's about, like, substantive equality. Like, they're saying, look, it's not enough to just say everyone's equal on paper. We need to take action to actually level the playing field, address the historical disadvantages that certain groups have faced.
Yeah, it's about rectifying past wrongs.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some rights that are just super, like, cool forward thinking.
Yeah, like that right to privacy.
Right.
It even covers protection against, like, communication infringement. And this Constitution was written before, the internet blew up.
Right.
But they were already thinking about protecting our digital lives.
It's amazing.
It's impressive, huh?
But hold on. Even with all these rights, there's this little thing called the limitation clause in Section 36.
Ah, yes. The reality check.
It basically says, look, we love these rights, but they're not absolute.
Right. Sometimes they bump up against other important things like, public safety
Right.
or national security.
Gender security, yeah.
So the limitation clause, it's like a safety valve, right? It says, okay, in certain very specific situations, you can limit these rights, but it can't be arbitrary.
It's got to be justified.
It has to be justified, proportionate.
So there's a balance.
It's all about finding that balance.
All right. We've talked about values. We've talked about rights.
The foundation.
But now let's get into, like, how power actually works in South Africa, right?
And the nuts and bolts.
So the Constitution sets up this system with 3 levels of government: national, provincial, and local. And they all work together under this concept of cooperative governance.
Teamwork.
Yeah, it's like a team effort.
Yeah.
Each level, they have their own responsibilities,
Yeah.
but they're supposed to collaborate, right?
Right.
Work together for the good of the whole country.
Right, for the common good.
So let's start at the top, the national level. Chapter 4 of the Constitution, it tells us all about their legislature, which is bicameral.
Bicameral.
Yeah.
Fancy word, right.
It means 2 houses.
2 houses, so you got the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces.
Right, and the reason they have 2 houses, well, it's all about making sure that different voices are heard,
Yeah.
Different interests, different perspectives, they all get represented in the lawmaking process.
It's like a double check system,
Yeah,
right? To make sure laws are, like, thoroughly thought through and everyone's point of view is taken into account.
so the National Assembly, that's directly elected by the people, right?
Yeah, the people's house.
So it's all about representing the will of the citizens, the everyday South Africans.
And then you have the National Council of Provinces. They're representing the interests of the provinces.
Hold on. How many provinces are there?
9.
9.
9 provinces.
Wow.
South Africa is a diverse country. Geographically, culturally, each province, it has its own legislature, its own executive council.
So each province, it gets to have a say in how things are run at the national level,
Exactly.
making sure their unique needs are, like, taken into account.
It's about balancing those regional interests with national priorities, right?
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the national level. But what about closer to home? Like at the community level,
Well, that's where local government comes in.
right? And Chapter 7 of the Constitution, it's all about that. It emphasizes the importance of municipalities.
Right, municipalities. They're like the level of government closest to the people.
They're the ones dealing with the nitty-gritty, right? Like making sure the trash gets collected, the lights stay on.
Yeah, providing essential services,
Yeah.
water, sanitation, electricity, you name it.
They're the ones making sure things actually work in the community.
Making life better for people in their neighborhoods.
And the South African Constitution, it gives them a lot of power to do that.
Real responsibility.
Yeah, real responsibility.
Like, to actually make a difference.
Okay, we can't talk about a democracy without talking about checks and balances, right?
Yeah.
How does the South African Constitution make sure that no one gets too much power?
That's a good question. And that's where Chapter 9 comes in. It's all about these independent institutions. These are bodies that operate outside the direct control of the government.
I love that. They're like watchdogs.
Watchdogs, exactly. They're there to make sure that power is used responsibly and those rights we talked about, they're protected.
Give me some examples. Who are these watchdogs?
Okay, so you've got the public protector. Think of them as like the champion of the people.
Okay.
They investigate government misconduct. They fight for justice. They're the ultimate accountability officer, right? Making sure those in power don't abuse their authority.
So if a politician steps out of line, the public protector can be like, not so fast.
Exactly. We're watching you.
Okay. Who
You've
we
got
tell?
the Electoral Commission. They're all about making sure elections are free and fair.
Which is, like, fundamental to any democracy,
The
right?
foundation.
Making sure the people's voices are actually heard.
Exactly. And then you've got the Auditor General. They're like the financial watchdogs.
Ooh.
They scrutinize the government's books, make sure there's no funny business going on, right? No one's wasting taxpayer money. They publish reports. And those reports, they can expose corruption, wasteful spending.
Oh, that's got to be embarrassing.
You can be.
Talk about keeping people honest.
That's the idea.
So you've got all these institutions, they're all working together to keep the system in check.
It's an intricate web of accountability.
It's a pretty impressive system they've got going on there.
It's a testament to their commitment to building a democracy that actually works.
All right, so that's like the overview, right? The foundation of how the South African Constitution is structured.
The building blocks?
But there's so much more to explore.
Oh, yeah, we're just getting started.
Buckle up, folks, because we're going to dive even deeper into this incredible document.
Can't wait.
Let's do it.
Let's go. All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into the South African Constitution. We've laid some serious groundwork here, haven't we? Exploring all those values, the Bill of Rights, the whole structure of their government.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It is, right. We've seen how they've really set the stage for a society that's more just, more equitable, but there's more.
Okay, there's always more.
There's always more to unpack. And now we got to zoom in, on some of those specific mechanisms, the things they've actually put in place to make sure those principles, they actually get, put into practice.
Like the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, exactly. And a good place to start, I think, is with the courts.
Ah, yes, the court.
Chapter 8 of the Constitution, it's all about courts and administration of justice.
The arbiters of justice, right? The guardians of the law.
Love it.
So how do they work in the South African context?
Well, they've got this multi-tiered court system, kind of like a pyramid, right?
I like pyramids.
Yeah, at the base, you've got the magistrates' courts. They handle those everyday cases.
Like your traffic tickets, your neighborhood disputes.
Exactly. Then above them, you've got the high courts. They deal with the more serious cases. And they can also hear appeals from the magistrates' courts.
So if you don't like what the magistrate decided, you can go, no, I'm taking this higher.
You got it. And then at the very top of the pyramid, the big leagues.
Okay.
We've got the Constitutional Court.
The Constitutional Court.
The ultimate authority on all matters constitution.
That's some serious power.
It is. They have the final say on any dispute about what the Constitution means, whether it's being followed, how it should be applied. They can even strike down laws passed by Parliament or actions taken by the president.
They can overrule the president.
If they find it unconstitutional, yeah.
Wow. That's a serious check on executive power.
Big time.
So it's not just about resolving disputes.
It's bigger than that.
It's about shaping, how the Constitution is understood and applied in the whole country.
Right. Every decision they make, it sets a precedent.
Okay.
And the lower courts, they have to follow those precedents. So their rulings, they have this ripple effect, right? Across the entire legal system, shaping how the Constitution is interpreted for everyone.
They're like the guardians of the Constitution, making sure it stays, relevant and powerful as times change.
That's a great way to put it.
All right, so they've got a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you become one of these, constitutional judges?
Well, Section 174, it lays out a very rigorous process for appointing judges.
Okay.
It's not just about, knowing the law.
Right, you got to have the right character, the integrity.
Exactly. Candidates, they're nominated, there's consultations, and then finally, the president appoints them.
Okay, but it's not just the president's decision. Right?
No. The Judicial Service Commission, this body that represents different parts of the legal system, they play a key role.
So it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah, it's about making sure that only the most qualified, the most ethical people become judges.
But, okay, what if a judge, messes up?
Good question.
Is there a way to, to get them off the bench?
There is, but it's not easy.
Okay.
Section 177, it outlines that whole process, and it requires a finding of, incapacity, gross incompetence, or gross misconduct.
So you can't just, fire a judge because you don't like their rulings.
No. It has to be serious stuff.
Okay, there are safeguards in place.
Safeguards, yeah.
To protect that judicial independence.
Right.
but also mechanisms for accountability when necessary.
When absolutely necessary, yeah.
And speaking of safeguards, there's this whole section, Section 175, that's all about protecting the courts from, outside influence.
Like keeping them independent.
Basically saying no one, not even the government, can interfere with how the courts do their job.
Judges need to be free to make decisions based on the law, not based on, who's putting pressure on them.
Right. They've got a lot of responsibility, but they're also protected.
They have to be.
All right. We've covered the courts.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another super important area, security. Chapter 11 of the Constitution, it's all about security services.
Security. Vital for any country.
Right. But it can also be like a source of abuse, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in a country with a history like South Africa's, right? Where security forces, they're often used to enforce apartheid, to suppress dissent.
So how does the Constitution address this, this sensitive issue?
It's very clear it lays down some serious guidelines. Section 198, it outlines those principles for national security. And the emphasis is on everything being done according to the law with respect for human rights.
No cutting corners.
No cutting corners, even in the name of security.
Okay, so the security services, they're accountable.
To Parliament.
Parliament, which means they have to answer to the people's elected representatives.
It's about that accountability again, right?
Hey, this seems like a recurring theme here.
It's a foundation of their democracy.
Okay, so let's break down the security services themselves. Like, what are we talking about here?
Okay, so Section 199, it establishes a single defense force, a single police service, and intelligence services.
Okay.
And it explicitly says that these are the only legitimate armed forces in the country.
So no private armies, no militias running around.
Nope.
It's all about maintaining order and security, but under the control of the state.
And that was very deliberate.
Right.
To prevent, the kind of violence and instability that you get when you have all these different armed groups fighting for power.
Right. They've been there. They don't want to go back.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the defense force. Like, what's their role?
Well, Section 200, it outlines their purpose,
Okay.
which is to defend and protect the Republic, its territory, and its people.
Seems straightforward.
Yeah. The president is the commander-in-chief, but there are some important limitations on their power.
So the president can't just, send troops wherever they want.
Nope. No way. Section 201, it states that the defense force can only be deployed within South Africa with the approval of Parliament.
Okay.
And even in emergencies, the president has to inform Parliament right away.
So it's not just a military decision.
Yeah.
It's a political one.
Exactly. Subject to democratic oversight.
Checks and balances.
Oh.
Dev again.
Oh, wait.
All right, what about the police? They're the ones we usually interact with when it comes to, security in our daily lives.
Right, the ones on the ground.
So what does the Constitution say about them?
So Section 205, it outlines their responsibilities. And it's interesting because it's not just about enforcing the law.
Okay.
It's also about preventing crime, maintaining public order, protecting people and their property.
So it's a more holistic approach.
It is.
Like community safety, well-being.
Yeah, not just catching the bad guys after the fact.
Right, preventing things from happening in the first place.
Exactly.
And to make sure that policing is done, effectively and responsibly, Section 206, it sets up this complex system.
Okay. Where responsibilities are shared between the national and provincial governments.
So it's not just a top-down approach.
No, there's room for regional variation,
Okay.
adapting to local needs.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then to ensure accountability within the police service itself, Section 207, it establishes a national commissioner
Okay.
who's appointed by the president
Okay.
to oversee the whole police force.
So there's a clear chain of command.
Yeah, someone's ultimately responsible for how the police operate.
All right, now, before we move on, let's talk about a topic that's, always a little mysterious.
A little shadowy, right?
A little shadowy intelligence services.
Yes, the world of spies and espionage.
Necessary, but also, can be easily abused.
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
So how does the South African Constitution make sure that intelligence gathering gets done ethically, legally?
Okay, so Section 209, it's pretty clear. Intelligence services can only be established by the president, and they got to operate within the law. No rogue agents, no illegal activities.
Even James Bond has to follow the rules in South Africa.
Even James Bond.
But who watches the watchers?
Right.
How do we know they're not being used for, nefarious purposes?
That's a good point. And that's where Section 210 comes in. It emphasizes the importance of coordinating intelligence services
Okay.
and ensuring civilian oversight.
So there are mechanisms in place
There are.
to monitor what they're doing.
Make sure they're not being used for political purposes to violate people's rights.
So there's accountability, even in the world of spies.
Even in the shadows, there's accountability.
The Constitution is pretty thorough.
It is. It is. And it reflects, the hard lessons learned from their own past, right?
Where intelligence services were used to, like, silence people.
Suppress dissent, target opponents.
Yeah, they've been there, done that. They're not going back.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Talk about a fascinating aspect of the South African Constitution. Chapter 12, traditional leaders.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah, it's this blend of, like, ancient traditions and modern democracy.
It's a beautiful mix.
An area that's often, I think, misunderstood or overlooked.
It is, yeah. But it's a testament to South Africa's commitment to, recognizing their diverse heritage while also building this new, inclusive society. Section 211, that's where it all begins.
Okay.
It recognizes the institution, the status, and the role of traditional leadership according to customary law.
So who are these traditional leaders? What kind of role do they play?
Okay, so they're individuals who hold positions of authority within communities that observe customary law, right?
Okay.
Often based on, lineage, heritage. They can be chiefs, headmen, or other respected figures who play, significant roles in their communities.
So it's a parallel system of authority.
In a way, yeah, it exists alongside the formal government structures, but the Constitution is careful to make sure that their authority is exercised in a way that aligns with the Bill of Rights, with the principles of democracy.
So they can't just do whatever they want.
No, there are limits.
There are limits.
Section 212, it allows for national and provincial legislation to actually define the role of traditional leaders in local governance. It also allows for the creation of, houses of traditional leaders and a national council of traditional leaders.
So it's like they're being integrated into the democratic system.
Yeah.
But the details, they get worked out through legislation.
It's an ongoing process, and there's often debates about how to strike that balance, respecting traditional authority while making sure it doesn't clash with the Constitution's values.
And what happens if there is a clash, right, between customary law, which is what these traditional leaders often rely on, and the Constitution itself?
That's the million-dollar question. In the Constitution, it's actually very clear. Section 211, it explicitly states that the recognition of traditional leadership is subject to the Constitution.
So the Constitution wins.
The Constitution always wins. Those rights and freedoms, they can't be overridden by tradition or custom.
Okay, so that's clear.
Crystal clear.
The Constitution is the boss.
The top dog.
All right, it's fascinating to see how South Africa is trying to, navigate this complex terrain, right? Respecting their heritage while building a modern, inclusive democracy.
It's a delicate dance, for sure.
All right, let's move on to a topic that's close to everyone's heart. Money.
Oh, yeah. Money, money, money.
Yeah.
Chapter 13, all about finance.
The lifeblood of any government.
You can't do much without it.
So how does the South African Constitution approach, financial management?
They're very structured about it,
Okay.
emphasizing transparency, accountability, responsible spending.
Sounds like a good plan.
It's a solid plan.
So where do we start?
Okay, so Section 213, it establishes this thing called the National Revenue Fund.
The National Revenue Fund.
It's basically the government's bank account, right? All the money the national government receives, taxes, fees, anything, it all goes into this fund.
Okay, so it's all centralized.
It's all there, managed properly.
Here, and then how do they get the money out?
That's Section 214. It's very specific. Money can only be withdrawn from the National Revenue Fund through an appropriation by an act of Parliament.
So no one's just dipping into the cookie jar?
No. There's got to be authorization.
Parliament has to approve it.
Parliament controls the purse strings, which is, how it should be.
Yeah, the people's representatives.
Exactly.
Okay, now what about the budget process? How do they actually plan their spending?
So Section 215, it mandates that a national budget has to be presented to Parliament every year.
Okay.
And this budget, it has to outline all the estimated revenue and expenditure for the coming financial year.
So it's all transparent.
Transparency is key.
It's not just a secret document hidden away somewhere.
No, it's public. Open for scrutiny, debate.
And then to make sure the money's actually used responsibly, Section 216 creates the National Treasury.
The money managers.
They're the ones overseeing spending across all levels of government.
Making sure no one's wasting taxpayer money.
So they're like the watchdogs.
Yeah, promoting those sound financial management practices.
All right, let's talk about procurement.
Yeah.
The process of actually buying goods and services.
Yes, procurement.
An area where, things can get a little shady.
A little bit, a little bit.
Shady deals, backroom agreements, all that.
Right, so how do they safeguard against that?
Yeah, how do they keep it clean?
Okay, so Section 217, it sets out some very clear principles. Anytime a government entity contracts for goods or services, they got to do it fairly, equitably, transparently, competitively, and cost-effectively.
So, no favoritism, no sweetheart deals.
Nope, it's about getting the best value for the money while also making sure the process is, open and honest.
All right, so we talked about the national level.
Mm-hmm.
What about the provinces and municipalities? Do they have their own, financial autonomy?
They do. The Constitution, it embraces this principle of fiscal federalism.
Fiscal federalism.
It means different levels of government. They have their own sources of revenue,
Right.
their own responsibilities for spending.
So it's not just the national government calling all the shots.
No, there's a distribution of power.
Okay, so what kind of, guidelines are we talking about?
So Section 228, it deals with provincial finances. It gives provincial legislatures the power to impose certain taxes, levies, and duties.
Okay.
But there are limits.
There's always a limit.
They can't do anything that would harm the national economy or prevent, the free flow of goods and services across provincial borders.
So they have some freedom, but they can't go rogue.
No going rogue.
And what about local governments, the municipalities?
Okay, so Section 229, it outlines their fiscal powers.
Okay.
They can impose property taxes, other levies, but again, within limits set by national legislation.
So property taxes are a key source of revenue for them.
Yeah, but they can't just, tax people into oblivion.
Right. There's a balance.
And to make things even more interesting.
Okay, I like interesting.
Section 229, it also allows for revenue sharing between municipalities that operate in the same area.
So they can pool their resources, work together.
Yeah, collaboration. Finding solutions that benefit everyone.
And to make sure all this financial juggling is done fairly, the Constitution created the Financial and Fiscal Commission.
They're like the referees.
The referees.
They advise Parliament and the provincial legislatures on all these financial matters. One of their key roles is recommending how revenue should be divided between the different levels of government.
So they're making sure everyone gets their fair share.
Exactly. Preventing those financial disputes.
Between the national, provincial, and local.
That's right. Keeping everything balanced and sustainable.
All right, we've covered taxes, revenue, spending.
Mm-hmm.
What about borrowing? Governments sometimes need to take out loans, right?
Oh, yeah, especially for big infrastructure projects.
Or if they have budget shortfalls.
Exactly.
So can local governments go into debt?
They can. Sections 230 and 230A deal with that specifically, provincial and municipal loans.
Okay, but there are rules.
Oh, of course. There are always rules.
The Constitution's clear. These loans have to be raised in accordance with national legislation.
It's about responsible borrowing, right?
Making sure they don't get into too much trouble.
No one wants a debt crisis.
So it's not a free-for-all, even when it comes to borrowing.
Nope. There are those checks and balances.
Man, the South African Constitution, it really does cover all the bases.
It's comprehensive.
It's like a blueprint for good governance.
It really is.
From human rights to security to financial management.
All the essential ingredients.
And we've only scratched the surface.
Oh, there's so much more.
Well, let's keep going.
Yeah, we've got more to uncover in this deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've been on this incredible journey exploring the South African Constitution, from the Bill of Rights to how they handle their finances.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride.
It's amazing how much detail is packed into this document.
It really is.
But there's one more area we got to cover before we wrap up.
One more piece of the puzzle.
Okay, hit me with it.
Let's talk about South Africa on the global stage, how they interact with the rest of the world.
International relations.
Chapter 14 of the Constitution, General Provisions, it has a whole section on that.
Okay, treaties, agreements, international law, a whole different ballgame.
It is, and it can be tricky, figuring out how to engage with the global community while also protecting your own interests, your sovereignty as a nation.
So how does South Africa approach this?
Well, Section 231, it lays out the rules of the game.
Okay.
It gives the president, as the head of the national executive, the power to negotiate and sign international agreements.
So the president gets to make deals with other countries.
They do, but there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
Most of these agreements, they have to be approved by both houses of parliament.
Checks and balances again.
All
So it's
right.
not just the president making decisions on their own.
Nope. Parliament, which represents the people, they get a say.
So make sure that those international agreements, They actually reflect what the people want.
Exactly. And that they don't go against the country's interests.
Okay, so what about, like, those more technical agreements, the ones that aren't as high stakes?
Yeah, the more administrative
Do
stuff.
those need full parliamentary approval?
They don't, but they still have to be presented to both houses
Right.
for transparency.
So even for the small stuff, Parliament is kept in the loop.
It's all about accountability.
All right, now let's talk about something called customary international law.
Ooh, customary international law.
Sounds kind of mysterious.
It's like the unwritten rules of the global community, right?
Okay.
Norms and practices that countries have been following for so long, they've become accepted as binding, even though they're not actually written down in any treaty.
So it's like those unspoken rules everyone knows, but no one ever talks about.
Exactly, like diplomatic immunity.
Okay.
That's a good example. Diplomats are protected from being arrested in the countries where they're stationed.
Right, they have that special status.
Or the prohibition on torture. That's considered a fundamental violation of human rights, no matter what any specific law says.
Okay, so these are all examples of customary international law. So how does South Africa deal with these unwritten rules?
Well, Section 232 of their constitution says that customary international law is considered part of South African law,
Okay.
unless it conflicts with their constitution or an act of parliament.
So it's binding, but their own laws always come first.
Exactly. They're acknowledging those global norms, but they're also protecting their own sovereignty.
It's a smart approach.
They're not turning their back on the world, but they're also not letting international law dictate everything they do.
Okay, before we wrap up, there's one more topic I want to touch on. Section 235, which deals with self-determination.
Ah, yes,
It's
self-determination.
a powerful concept, but also a complicated one.
It's about the right of a people to govern themselves, to decide their own destiny.
Right.
But it can get messy, especially in a diverse country like South Africa with all these different groups and communities.
So how does the Constitution handle this?
Well, Section 235, it acknowledges that complexity. It recognizes the right of the South African people as a whole to self-determination.
Okay.
And that this right, it's reflected in the very existence of their constitution.
Okay.
But it also leaves open the possibility of recognizing the right of self-determination for communities within South Africa.
So it's not just about the nation as a whole, but also about respecting the aspirations of different groups.
Exactly. Trying to balance national unity with the recognition of diversity.
Sounds like a tough balancing act.
It is, but the Constitution, it leaves the specifics to be determined by national legislation.
Okay, so there's flexibility.
There's room to adapt to different situations.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have, from the Bill of Rights to the courts, security services, financial management, and now even international relations.
It's been an amazing journey through the South African Constitution.
It really has. This document, it's a testament to the power of dialogue, compromise, the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity.
It shows that even in the darkest of times, people can come together to build something better.
Absolutely.
So to our listener, we hope you've gained a deeper understanding of this remarkable document.
And maybe even a little inspiration.
To keep learning, to keep questioning, and to keep those constitutional conversations going.
Because these conversations, they matter.
They do. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the South African Constitution. We'll see you next time.
See you then.